Well, well, well. It's fancy seeing you here. This is the first time I've done a solo video on this channel in a long time. I've been focused on Top Shot, but we're still all about fantasy football over here. My apologies for leaving you guys high and dry recently. I've been putting out those hype clips on YouTube that I pulled from Twitter. Thank you to my man Tony DiBiase, Jared, aka Sexy Pats, and my man Gabe for helping me edit those. They will continue to come out Tuesdays, Thursdays, and maybe Saturdays if you guys are acting right. But I hope to continue this series of Guess Who and other more creative types of content on either Wednesdays or Fridays. I'm not exactly sure how the schedule is going to line up, whether it's going to be consistently on Wednesdays or Fridays. I don't want to make any promises. The only promise I will make is that I'm not making any promises. But without any further ado, without any more rambling, we're going to hit the intro, and then I'm going to do what I do best, talk about a player in general terms, just talking about their stats, talking about other factors as to why I think they're underrated, give you guys a little bit of time to guess who it is, and then pull back the mask, see the man pulling the levers, and find out which player I've actually been talking about for the 5 minutes previous. Without further ado, let's hit that intro.
Who's that?
Underrated wide receiver. Anyways, let's talk about who this guy was coming into the league. First off, he was mainly known for his athleticism, but when you take a deep dive into his actual production when he was in college, it was extremely impressive. He ranked in the 97th percentile, the 98th percentile, and the 99th percentile in terms of college dominator, breakout age, and college target share, respectively. Putting it into layman's terms, he dominated his team's percentage of their offense through the air, which is college dominator. He broke out at a young age, meaning he was extremely young when he hit that 20% threshold in terms of college dominator. And also, college target share is just another way of saying, yeah, he was really fucking good, while everybody else on his team may have been mediocre, but he stood out from the pack by dominating the targets in that offense. So 97th, 98th, 99th percentile. I don't know about you, but that sounds like really high numbers to me. And he backed that up with his athleticism as well. He ranked in at least the 88th percentile in each of the 40-yard dash, the speed score, burst score, and catch radius as per playerprofiler.com. So not only was he productive during his time in the NCAA, he came into the league extremely athletic. And I'm not going to say what his draft capital was because it'll probably give it away, but I'm pretty sure you can surmise where he was picked or what round he was picked based on the type of profile that he came into the league with. Next up, talking about his production when he's actually on the NFL field, because a lot of people will continue to hype up Christian Kirk and N'Keal Harry because they have high bar graphs and tested out well at the combine and had good college profiles. Guess what? They've been in the league for half a decade now and they haven't done jack shit. So I'm not going to hype up guys that were good 4 or 5 years ago in college when they can't do anything on the NFL field. With this guy, it's completely different. We look at what he's done to this point of his career. He has logged the 15th most yards from scrimmage for a wide receiver in their first 3 years in the NFL ever. No qualifiers there, not since the Super Bowl era, not since the year 2000, not since 2010, ever. Of all receivers who have ever been rookies through their third year, he has the 15th most yards from scrimmage ever. And since the year 2000, this is where the qualifier comes in. Since the year 2000, he ranks ninth, just behind Odell Beckham Jr., AJ Green, Michael Thomas, Tyreek Hill, Mike Evans, DeAndre Hopkins, Anquan Bolden, and Deshaun Jackson. That's pretty good company to be in. And honestly, guys like Deshaun Jackson may have never reached their true peak because of things like injuries, but using yards from scrimmage instead of just receiving yards also paints a picture, because the guy I'm talking about right now is because guys like Deshaun Jackson and even Tyreek Hill pick up yards on the ground, they score touchdowns on the ground, and that also, believe it or not, translates to fantasy production. Rushing yards also count. Rushing touchdowns also count. And this guy can really do it all. And speaking of those 9 men that I just mentioned, this player that I'm talking about right now, who I have not released the name of, is the only wide receiver of that group with less than 16 touchdowns in his first 3 years in the league. He's been extremely unlucky in the touchdown department. And just he, DeAndre Hopkins, and Anquan Bolden are the three players with less than 23 touchdowns in their first 3 years. So basically, every other player was averaging 8 touchdowns a year through their first 3 years. 24 divided by 3, quick math, that's 8. So a good portion of them were more lucky and more productive in the touchdown department. Not to say that this player is going to be a touchdown monster, but a lot of his production has come by way of picking up yards, which is a lot more predictive than touchdowns. And there's always that chance that he does better in the touchdown department, whether it be because of the deep receiving game or increased red zone looks or just bigger breakaway plays or what have you. So I wouldn't write off his career at the young age he has now because he hasn't scored a lot of touchdowns. We've seen guys like Andre Johnson, DeAndre Hopkins to an extent, obviously Anquan Bolden, get unlucky earlier in their career because of a lack of touchdowns, and then that work itself out as their careers go along. And just continuing to talk about how good he's been at a young age, he's just one of 5 wide receivers to put up 1,200 plus yards from scrimmage in at least 2 seasons before the age of 24. The other guys on this list, Randy Moss, Odell, Mike Evans, DeAndre Hopkins. I mean, every list I've been naming is just Hall of Fame caliber players. I guess Odell, you may argue that, but he was at his peak one of the best, if not the best wide receiver in the league at his time. And the fact that this guy can be mentioned in the same conversation as any of these GOATs lets me know and gives me confidence that what he's doing right now is still being severely overlooked and severely undervalued. And not even just talking about how historically great he's been. We can look at what he's done these past few seasons in terms of his current peers and his current competition in the NFL and look at his production. He is actually the only wide receiver in the entire NFL to have over 1,200 yards from scrimmage in each of their past 2 years. That's crazy to think when guys like DeAndre Hopkins are still playing, who hasn't been injured. Devontae Adams has been injured, but he played a big portion of this year. He couldn't hit 1,200 yards from scrimmage. Keenan Allen obviously got hurt, but like all these top guys, Mike Evans, Calvin Ridley, Julio Jones, Chris Godwin, all these guys, sure, there's injuries there that held back guys like Julio Jones and Chris Godwin from reaching 1,200 yards from scrimmage. But for me, if I got a guy on my team, I value the ability to stay on the field and I value continued production. So if you want to write off the fact that Julio hasn't put up 1,200 yards from these past 2 years because he's been injured, and you want to just say, oh, well, if he wasn't injured, he would have put up 1,200 yards. That's nice to say. I could also say if this player scored 8 touchdowns, he'd be your dynasty wide receiver one. So you can always rationalize away anything. But the fact of the matter is, I almost said his name. This guy has been on the field and been productive and has hit that threshold that no other wide receiver has hit each of the past 2 years. And then just last year alone, talking about what he did, he was only one of 11 receivers to rank top 20 in both completed air yards and yards after the catch, ranking eighth in completed air yards, 16th in yards after the catch, which leads me to believe that this guy's really fucking good. Because not only is he catching the ball deep down the field, he's also catching the ball short over the middle in the screen game, wherever, and picking up yards after the catch, showing that he is not only dependent on the deep game, but can also do work after the catch. And ironically, he was known more for his after the catch abilities than the deep game prior to this year. His roles flipped, and that's kind of where he was utilized in 2020. He struggled a little bit to start, but as the year went on, he really picked it up. And I think that hint alone will let you know who this player is. And to continue with those struggles that he faced in the deep game, not only because that wasn't really his area of expertise heading into the year, but he also played with a pretty fucking shit quarterback. And I got to tone down the swearing. It's just like part of my vocabulary now. And I can't be going out in the real world just using that word before every adjective. But just speaking on the guy throwing him the ball, right? He was not great. He was very mediocre in the deep game. He had the 17th most deep attempts in the league and was 13th in deep ball accuracy. So not only was he not throwing it deep a ton, but when he was the picture of mediocrity, not really completing all the passes that he was attempting. And on top of that, in terms of scoring opportunities, we already talked about how this wide receiver hasn't been lucky in the red zone, hasn't been lucky scoring the ball. It doesn't help that his quarterback was 38th in red zone completion percentage. Do the math. There's 32 starting quarterbacks. Obviously, things get shuffled around with guys going down to injury. But anytime you're outside the top 32, anytime you're outside the top 20, I kind of want to puke. When you're 38th and you're a starting quarterback and you're making near $20 million a year, one, whoever's running the financials in this front office has to go. And two, this guy does not deserve to be a starting quarterback. And I think next year we will see him backing up a rookie very early on in the season. And the last point I want to make, just talking about dynasty value as a whole, I already established that this guy is now heading into his fourth year. He's been in the league for 3 years. But speaking on opportunity, he has a wide receiver on his team right now who is going into free agency. And him going into free agency opens up 118 touches a game. They both play kind of similar roles. So I'm not saying that all 118 touches are going to go directly to this guy, but a good chunk of them and a pretty big portion will be funneled over if this receiver leaving the team is gone. And this other guy that I'm talking about, I hate being so abstract with it, but I got to do it for the sake of the video. The guy I'm talking about could definitely capitalize on these opportunities, score the touchdowns that this other guy was scoring, be used in different facets of the game like this guy was being used in, and can really capitalize on the absence of him going forward. Okay, I can't stand to not say this guy's name anymore. So before I reveal who it is, let's hit that little Pokemon cut. Put your comments down below as to who you think it is, and then we'll get into the masked man.
Who's that?
Underrated wide receiver.
It's
How do you like it? How do you like it?
All right, if me saying that he went from a slot receiver to a deep ball type of guy and his quarterback sucked and a player with 118 touches was leaving the picture, didn't give it away enough, then this will. It's DJ Moore, wide receiver for the Carolina Panthers. And admittedly, I was lower than I should have been on him. I looked at my rankings earlier. I think I had him like wide receiver 21 in Dynasty. And as I moved them up and moved them up and moved them up, I'm not sure if this is me being a complete fraud and seeing how fragile my rankings are, but he went all the way up to my wide receiver 10 ahead of a guy like DeAndre Hopkins. He is super young. He is super productive. And there's no reason to think that he's going to slow down anytime soon. And I always love to harp on me buying into guys who produce in the face of terrible situations. What is a worse situation in the NFL than having to play with Cam Newton with a bum ankle and a bum shoulder, play with Kyle Allen, play with Will Greer, play with Teddy Bridgewater, play with PJ Phillip, whatever the fuck his first name is, Walker. He's had a motley crew of quarterbacks, none of which can really complete a pass. Yet he's put up 1,200 yards from scrimmage each of these past 2 years. He's extremely versatile. He went from a slot receiver to a deep ball guy and was still productive after the catch and in the deep receiving game, despite flipping the script. He has an elite collegiate profile coming to the league. He capitalized on it. The only reason you wouldn't be in on a guy like DJ Moore is because of his lack of touchdowns. And him scoring four touchdowns, five touchdowns, like however many touchdowns he scored in his first 3 years in the league. Not saying that he is bound to regress positively because innately him regressing to his own mean would mean he's going to stay around 4 touchdowns because he hasn't really improved in that department. But to say that he's never going to have an 8 touchdown season, a 9 touchdown season, I think is kind of foolish. The type of player he is, he's extremely similar to AJ Brown. AJ Brown is obviously a little bit bigger and better in the red zone, but we see AJ Brown score breakaway touchdowns all the time. This year, DJ Moore was extremely unlucky because he was used deep down the field. A lot of the time when he was making those deep receptions, it wasn't breakaways, it was a lot of contested balls. And I don't know how many times I went on red zone and I saw Teddy Bridgewater just underthrow him on a deep ball. DJ Moore had to bail him out, jump up over a defender, haul it in, fall down at the catch point because he wasn't given the opportunity to continue running. Quarterback was not putting air under the ball. It was just a complete mess. I think whether it's Trey Lance, Zach Wilson, Justin Fields, even Mac Jones, it's going to be an improvement on Teddy Bridgewater. A better quarterback is just going to help him. Curtis Samuel, hopefully being gone, will definitely open up more opportunities for him. We see that Robbie Anderson is actually a pretty legit wide receiver, but that doesn't hurt DJ Moore at all because it's kind of a 1A, 1B situation. And any given week, they can flip up in those roles. But I think having a guy like Robbie Anderson, as well as CMC out of the backfield, allows for defenses to not solely focus on the electricity that is DJ Moore, allowing him to continue to get open over the middle, allowing him to continue getting open deep, and allowing him to continue capitalizing on the opportunities that are given to him. And when it comes down to it, right, this is a guy who is well within everybody's top 10, maybe fringy top 5 after his second year in the league. And although he didn't blow out his sophomore numbers in his third year in the league, right? Very similar output, less receptions, but like the same yards and same touchdowns, going from 87 receptions down to 66, but up from 1175 receiving yards to 1193, and then total yards from scrimmage, putting up the exact same output at 1,215 yards, but his yards per touch going up from 13.1 to 17.9, showing that in the face of limited volume or decreasing volume, he was able to improve his efficiency and maintain his output. And I don't know how many 23-year-old wide receivers with back-to-back 1,200-yard seasons you would look at throughout their career and be like, okay, I'm gonna lower him down my rankings from wide receiver 5 to wide receiver 18, wide receiver 17, wherever it is. If you have him as like a low end wide receiver 2, as I did as early as 2 hours ago, not to say you're wrong, but you're probably wrong because he is extremely talented in every aspect, whether it's college profile, whether it's athleticism, whether it's production that he's had throughout his entire time in the NFL. And even this year, right, he missed a game. So if we look at his 16 game pace, his pace would have been 70 receptions, 1,273 yards, and 4 touchdowns. And then you add on another 23 rushing yards on the ground. So legitimately almost 1,300 yards as a third year player in the NFL. It doesn't make sense to fade him, along with the fact that he plays in the NFC South. And if we know anything about the NFC South, it's that they don't play any sort of defense unless it's the Saints after like week 14. And by that point, you don't have to worry about it because it's going to be all garbage time for the Carolina Panthers. Obviously, it's kind of hyperbole because the Tampa Bay Buccaneers played really good defense this season and their secondary is getting better. But you know what I mean? They're not the most physically imposing division when it comes to secondaries and pass defense. I think he's also a player who's going to be completely fine, even if that's the case, because he can get open early and often over the middle, create after the catch, and just be that guy who we thought he was coming into the year, going to his second year, going into his third year, and now going into his fourth year. People start to lose hope because he's just boringly good. Like he just is consistently good. Throw that shit to the side. Just accept the fact that DJ Moore is going to continue to finish somewhere in that like wide receiver 8 to wide receiver 14 range for the rest of his career. And when you put it in that perspective, would you rather have that type of profile or a profile of a guy like Brandon Ayuk, who last year was extremely productive in the face of George Kittle and Deebo Samuel being injured. And now they have also a quarterback controversy like Carolina does as well. Give me DJ Moore. Give me DJ Moore over DeAndre Hopkins. That 6, 7 year age difference. Sure, Hopkins may be the better receiver for the next 1 or 2 years. But after that window, you're going to have DJ Moore for another 5, 6 years of shelf life. Give me DJ Moore. Give me DJ Moore over a guy like Amari Cooper, who also, before becoming a Dallas Cowboy, had touchdown concerns in Oakland. But you look at their output in terms of like receptions and receiving yards, they're not too different of players. And you can have DJ Moore at probably a cheaper price at a younger age as well. So that's where I'm at with DJ Moore. Let me know if you guys are all into him as well, or if you're not, why you're out on him and if it's because of touchdowns. Like a lot of these guys who don't score touchdowns a ton end up kind of regressing, and I hate using the word regression, but they end up improving that department. Like Stephon Diggs last year had 6 touchdowns, and then this past season in 2020, I believe had 6 touchdowns as well up until week 16, where he helped me Barry Scott, shout out you, and he ended up with 8 this season. If DJ Moore ever has a season with 8 touchdowns, you better believe the following year he's going to be a top 6, 7, 8 dynasty wide receiver. So just get out ahead of it while you can. Capitalize on the fact that people are afraid that he's never going to score more than 4 touchdowns in his entire career because he hasn't done that to this point yet. And buy the dip. As they always say, buy the dip. Get in Wall Street bets, type in $DJM. People will be like, who the fuck is that? And you can tell them the best wide receiver you never heard of out of Carolina. So that's all we got for today's video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. And if you didn't, well, the show goes on, baby. We'll see you next time. Peace.